Well, as we reconvene this special meeting, we welcome Amber and Chris that we didn't see earlier, but welcome. Appreciate your attendance today. Dr. Summers, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Be happy to.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Agenda item C1, consider approve the superintendent's evaluation. I'd like to make a motion to ratify the superintendent's final evaluation as prepared by the Board of Education and recommended for approval at this time.
Second.
Comments or questions?
This is where I get to make my comment.
Please.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is what I said earlier is what I applaud about this is the growth mindset Dr. Summers has, not only for himself, but also for us as a district. And I think that that is reflected in this evaluation, and I just appreciate that your vision and your mindset and your motivation to move forward and growing. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Ron, do you have any comments?
None, thank you.
Matt?
Thank you, Chris. Just want to thank Dr. Summers for his exceptional leadership. As the review that will be made public reflects, is Dr. Summers has done an incredible job, and we are grateful for his faithful service and navigating the storm that we've been going through for the last 2 years. So thank you, Dr. Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Clausen.
Thanks, Matt. Teresa?
I'd just like to echo my fellow board members' comments so far, and also to add that as much as we feel Dr. Summers is an exceptional superintendent, we also realize that he has more that he wants to do and be, and so we fully support that. And the document that will be public articulates that very well. And I think an aspect of a great leader is that he or she is never quite content with where they're at right now. So, and I think that's reflected as well. So thank you, Dr. Summers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to all the board members who made comments. I'm going to say this way. At my church, we sing a song called "Count Your Many Blessings." See what somebody did, and in my fortunate role of being able to consolidate or synthesize all of the feedback that we got from each of the board members and a self-appraisal from Dr. Summers, I literally felt like I was counting our blessings as I compiled this final report. And I appreciate the need and the desire to continue to improve. We're not there, but we are on a great path. Dr. Summers, anything you'd like to add to the process? Or
just a couple of quick remarks. Thank you all for the feedback. Grateful for this partnership, as well as where we've seen success and where we see opportunities for improvement. I'm also grateful for my team, I should say our team, and that includes our fantastic executive leadership team, as well as the work of all of our school staff and 750 plus employees that show up every day on behalf of every student. So grateful for the opportunity to continue to lead and be a proud superintendent of the best district around. Thank you again.
thank you, Dr. Summers. Ms. Wood, would you call the roll?
Mr. Clausen.
Here.
Sorry.
Ms. Wolf.
Vote.
Aye.
Mr. Swartz.
Here.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch. Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to C2, consider, approve before and after school child care provider. I'd like to make a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between Lewis Palmer School District 38 and Leading Edge Educational Services to provide before and after school childcare services beginning on August 16th, 2022 and expiring August 25th, 2025. That's a 3-year term, I just want to point out.
You need a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Could I ask just a brief explanation for those folks tuning in at home?
Sure. Yep, happy to. So this represents the decision of our elementary school principals and in collaboration with district leadership, a decision that was part of our RFP process, which was initiated earlier this calendar year. We had several applicants who were applying to provide these services for us for before and after care. We had a few real important criteria that were in front of us as this decision was made. One, obviously at the very top of the list, is that we provide excellent care for our students, as well as all of what our families have come to expect in the way that our kids are taken care of before and after school. So the quality of the programming is absolutely, no doubt, going to be in good hands as we're moving forward with this provider. Another key component was our desire to continue to provide tuition-free care for all district employees. And not every provider was in a position with their business model to be able to do this. Leading Edge was one that checked that box off and actually had some nice innovative approaches to also our revenue sharing stream. And third, we just desired a comprehensive approach to this work that relied upon collaboration, good communication. Leading Edge is a known provider already established in Colorado. They're actually based out back east, but they have several sites along up and down the Front Range, and they have excellent leadership that's in place to provide this service. So with all of that and more, as part of our decision-making process, we ultimately landed in offering this to Leading Edge. We've been in negotiation with them over the past few weeks to develop this memorandum of understanding, which is before you. It has been vetted. It is something that we are really excited about on our end, and what this approval will enable us to do is begin moving forward with communicating to the community, which we intend to do by the end of this week, letting them know what to expect in the change of provider. Our current provider will maintain services over the remainder of the school year as well as this summer, and on that note, I just want to make a public declaration of appreciation and gratitude for the type of programming that we've come to know through the YMCA. They are fantastic. They are a community partner in many ways. And at this point, we have made the decision to move forward with this new provider relationship, and we believe it'll be greatly appreciated by, again, our students, our families, as well as the staff in our system. So with that, I would entertain any other questions that you may have.
Do we know what the tuition rates will be? Will the tuition rates for Leading Edge be similar to the ones that for YMCA that we've had in the past?
Yes, they are very similar. They are attached to the memorandum, so you will see an attachment A that you can review. That was certainly part of you in some situations may be receiving. I should note that current matrix is subject to review and revision year over year, which is very standard in this industry in terms of what those price points are for this upcoming school year and then what they may be revised to look like as we're also moving forward. Leading Edge has committed to continue to include us in those conversations and to, again, deliver the types of services that we believe are best for our kids.
Thank you.
Teresa, anything?
No, thank you.
Ron, any comments or questions?
Just a quick question on the tuition to kind of piggyback on Ms. Upchurch's question. So I'm looking at the tuition schedule on the attachment here, and on the 22-23 pricing, and then there's a summary as far as discounts for full-time enrollment, military, etc. Is there an anticipated revenue number as it relates to the table for revenue sharing?
Ron, your question, I just didn't hear the, what was the part of the table that you were asking about?
Revenue sharing.
Looking at number 5,
Uh-huh.
document, revenue share,
Yes,
table,
yes,
number 1.
yes.
Based on 21-22 school year, what do we anticipate the revenue will be for 22-23?
5% to 7%, we're in that range. It'll depend on the number of students that are enrolled.
Okay. What's that revenue sharing in the current fiscal year?
It's not based on this table, so it's based on the previous contract that we have with the Y, and it was, do you recall looking, Ms. Wood?
Maybe I can make it simpler, just so you don't have to dig. It's not my intent to have you dig. Sorry about that. Is this a neutral net add or net negative from a revenue standpoint?
It's net neutral, presuming similar enrollment. If we were to increase enrollment, it would be an improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Ms. Wood, would you call the vote?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll now go to item D, work session items. We're going to start with D1, open discussion of a level 4 complaint. The board has a chance now to have an open discussion to address the level 4 complaint as presented during our executive session. Tiffany, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I have some reflections, and I'm sure I'll have more reflection in the coming days as we process through. I, first of all, want to applaud the parent that came forward to share their perspective on our programming and advocating for not only their own student, but other students in D38. And I also appreciate and applaud the perspective of where staff members and building administrators come from on that local control and wanting to meet goals. And I think that ultimately all parties involved want to make sure that we're doing best by our students, truly. And so what I'm curious and what I see as a path forward is what kind of collaboration can come about from this.
Teresa, any comments?
Sure, I guess I just have one reflection as a board, as a policy governance board, it's important to me as one board member, and I think, well, I can't speak for the rest of you, but I think you concur, that when and if and as we consider policy review and policy changes, possible policy changes, that we always consider the specificity of our policy and how, and while also retaining the flexibility and the balance for our administrators and our teachers and staff to use their expertise to do the very best they can for our children. So that's sort of governing thought I had after listening. And I would also like to express my appreciation for the parent coming forward, because any time a process like this occurs, we can all learn from it, and the district becomes stronger.
Thank you. Ron, any reflections?
Just real briefly, one of the things I think we may take for granted that is worth noting is this procedures in place for situations exactly like what we're encountering today. And it's great that we have a mechanism for members of our community to bring something to the highest level of the educational entity. And it's healthy for us to have this review on a periodic basis. So not only do I applaud the parent for having the fortitude and perseverance to go through this, but it's a worthy process and complaint for us to really think through, consider, and choose a course of action on. So.
Thank you, Ron. Matt, any reflections?
Yes, I concur with the statements of my fellow board members. I want to acknowledge the stakeholder that came forward and expressed a concern. I think as a board, we heard statements and had a good dialogue related to that. One thing that we're very lucky to have in District 38 is great administrators, teachers, and coaches. I think of the phrase, teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves. I think there was some healthy discussion and it was enlightening for me. But as a parent of 3 kids that attended 3 different high schools and 2 different districts that played varsity sports, there are some challenges. And I think as a board, what we need to do is we need to reflect at the current policy that's in place and determine what, if any, changes need to be addressed. Because even if changes are made to the policy, there could be unintended consequences, and that would be my primary concern.
Thank you, Matt. Again, I appreciate everyone's comments as well, and I appreciate the parent that didn't just appear today, but has spent 5 or 6 months on this particular issue. And it appears to me from reviewing everything that's occurred, there's been some improvement already implemented that I think is very positive. So the process works. At the end of the day, the board has 1 employee, and we govern by policy. And so the ask today was to amend policy, and I'm going to oversimplify, but essentially to be fair. And if we could, I would just have a policy for every one of us. Be fair. And if we could all do that, we wouldn't need as many chapters and verses of policy to create guiding principles. But that's okay. It is what it is, and what's fair to me may not be fair to my wife or to my child, etc. So I'm grateful for the process that we've been through because I think the system as a whole has benefited from the process. We will be issuing a written answer to the complaint within the time frame acquired, and I think we actually will vote on that at our regular meeting. But with that, I would like
Chris?
to then...
You had brought a thought. In order to come up with a written response, should we be discussing at this time, would it be appropriate to discuss because we've gone through our reflections, would it be appropriate to discuss what we see as us as board members moving forward? For example, when I said collaboration, I think to myself, there's got to be what the parent is sharing makes sense to me. It really does. It resonates. But is that policy or is it procedural at the building level, similar to what when we've seen changes at procedural level at building levels in other circumstances where we've seen marked improvement? There's got to be something that is win-win. And I don't know what that looks like. I honestly, reflecting here, that's when I said earlier, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know that it needs, I'm just going to put it out there. Does it need to be policy change? I don't know, but I don't know what it looks like to be fair to the coaches and to staff and to students and families who are trying to observe holidays or snow days.
Yeah, I'm cognizant of that process we still have to go through, but in my own mind, I'm a little reluctant to talk about this particular complaint because the more we talk about it, the more chance there is that it's not confidential.
Sure.
And to me, that's utmost in my mind, is that we need to make sure it's a confidential process. In terms of your specific question about, well, where are we leaning? We have three options. We can agree with the complainant, or we can agree with the district, or we can suggest a compromise of some sort. That's our options. I had anticipated that we would do that via email and then come up with consensus around what to present.
Just wanted to be mindful of sunshine laws.
Does that work, though, for you, if we do that approach?
I don't know that we can each give input without breaking sunshine laws via email.
Mr. Taylor, may I make a suggestion? You outlined three options, which I think are the potential actions that you all are wanting to take a vote on going into the upcoming regular meeting. And I think what Ms. Upchurch just surfaced is something we do want to be mindful of in regards to how you arrive at that decision publicly as opposed to another means. So what I think you are all trying to do right now is see how to best position that decision going into the 18th. I'm not sure how we can be of most assistance to you in the written development of that, but I think we can help. This is where yeah, please, go ahead.
Let me add, I see no difference in addressing the complaint, which was brought to us in executive session, than the performance appraisal that we also did in executive session. If we need to have another executive session to have a conversation as a group, we can do that. But I have been one-on-one with each board member reviewing the performance appraisal, and I don't think we're anywhere close to breaking any sunshine laws, because I've not met with two other board members ever in this matter.
No, but
It's been one-on-one.
we can't have a discussion via email either,
Who's we?
us as board members.
Individually?
So if we were to send out and say, here's my idea, and Ms. Phillips says, well, here's my idea, and you say, well, here's my idea, and we are having a discussion via email, the discussion needs to happen openly without it being an executive session. So that's all I was getting at is, and Mr. Taylor, if you want to be the one to say, I'll lead the response, and then we vote on it as a board at our April meeting, no, that's not breaking sunshine laws at all. I just wanted to be mindful of how we discuss to make sure that we are being mindful of the confidentiality of the individuals involved, but also making sure that the decision, when we come to that decision, that it's done above board. That's all. Mr. Clausen's experience might come in handy too on this one.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of what you said, Miss Upchurch. I did hear my name though.
So when we're having a discussion around wanting to maintain confidentiality of individuals, and we have to have a notice of written formal notice within a certain amount of time and vote on it as a board at our upcoming meeting, how do we go about having dialogue that is open and within the realms of Colorado's sunshine laws?
You know, as I see it, we have two options. We have another executive session where we could discuss this particular topic without making any decisions, or Mr. Taylor, as the board president, could contact each board member individually and then arrive at a understanding of the position of each board member, and then prepare a document for the board members to review and possibly approve.
Thank you, Matt. And I think Tiffany also then suggested that perhaps another board member could take the lead on that. And I think she was implying that might be you, or it could be Tiffany herself. I'm not, I don't care. Somebody needs to take the lead on it, and you raised that as a possibility. So what are your thoughts around that?
I was asking Mr. Go ahead.
There's a potential conflict of interest for me to be directly involved in that capacity, so I think it would be better that another board member handle it. Hi, Matt.
Tiffany, thoughts?
The way what Mr. Clausen stated with Chris as the president, and I think that's what you were saying, is preparing a written statement. I'm good with Mr. President doing it.
Teresa, any thoughts?
No, but I also have a potential conflict of interest, so I wouldn't want to write.
Ron, any thoughts?
I think the team's covered it. Thank you.
All right. So, Dr. Summers, I have what was presented to us from the complainant side and from the district side. I have a reluctance to have you lead this because you're on one side.
I was step 3 of the process.
Exactly. So I think it is incumbent on the board that we have to do this, and I'm more than happy to start the process. It'll come out to each of you individually as a draft, a reply based on the procedures that we're following, and your comments would be redirected back to me. I will compile them, synthesize them for review. If necessary, if any of you feel a need that we meet in executive session to discuss it, we can schedule that. Are we good?
Fair.
Yes.
Awesome.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you
next-
for your leadership on this.
Oh, you're welcome. The next agenda item is D, Work Session 2. Palmer Ridge High School geothermal update. And before I turn the mic over to you, gentlemen, I would like to express to you gratitude for the presentation. I've studied it. I've learned more by studying the presentation than I've ever known about this subject, and it is appreciated. So I just wanted to put that right out there, that it's much appreciated. We are limited on time somewhat, so hopefully the other board members had a chance to do as thorough review of it as I did. So if we can turn the time over now to Chris Coulter to walk through this presentation with us.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I really appreciate it. Wanted to extend congratulations to Jayhawk Nation. I had a good night last night. My parents both went to Kansas, so yeah, people are pretty excited at my house. I happen to be living with my parents right now.
So we trouble Chris to speak up just a little
life
bit,
has
please.
very funny ways.
Can you get more in the mic?
Oh, sorry.
They're not
Sorry.
quite hearing you.
Yes, is that good? Thank you again, Mr. Taylor, for the introduction. At the same time, hope everybody has had an opportunity to take a look at the presentation, and hopefully you are as excited as I am to walk into the world of thermodynamics. As I was a lost co-ed at Purdue, and it struggled then, and as I struggle now. But at the same time, this is a great opportunity for the school district and for Palmer Ridge to make some necessary corrections to what's going on out there. But the opportunity is ripe, and we're taking full advantage of that opportunity. Moving into the introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about the history at Palmer Ridge. What are the next steps? We're going to talk a little bit about when you're going to hear from me again with a cost estimate on what the successive steps are going to be as we move into next academic year and in full operation, cooling and heating, utilizing the geothermal, or what we call the GHX, the geothermal heat exchanger, or the bore field. Why geothermal? Why does it make sense? the American energy industry today. I think you'll be surprised at where the industry is today and some of the things that are going on, especially relative to what the distribution might look like in the United States today. There are some surprises there that, and we want to be understand that and understand what those kilowatt hours and where demand is going and what those cents are and what those costs are going forward and why geothermal is a good solution, understanding that it gives us the best situation to save money going forward. All right, let's start off with what were the problems out there at Palmer Ridge. Right off the bat, it was this hammering, essentially what we like to call in the industry hydraulic shock that was being created, and you saw a lot of that on those 8-inch lines, and we have some pictures actually in the presentation that show how we put back together the 8-inch pipe and then in all the necessary elbow locations where the hydraulic shock was manifesting itself and or hammering. Maybe some of you have had that in your house or various different things, but there are ways to mitigate that, but essentially what that is it's air that's caught in those lines, and then the way that the pumps, as you can see in the description there, we had to ramp up and ramp down, and the pumps hunting for where they needed to go, and these were large pumps associated with what's going on. So when they ramped up very, very quickly and ramped back down, that's what created that hydraulic shock, and as you can imagine, that shock on elbows and other connection points within the 8-inch pipe resulted in leaking. These are some examples and some pictures. You can see where the scabbed location is there. The copper pipe that you see there is actually, we bleed off of the primary 8-inch line directly to the heat pumps throughout the facility, the 220,000 square foot facility. And our situation is unique in the sense that it is a school and all those heat pumps are servicing individual locations within the building. We're not talking about 8 or 10 heat pumps. We're talking about nearly 200 heat pumps that are in the building. So the way that this system works and the way that what we call EWT, or the entering water temperature coming from the bore field, works and what that temperature is and how it interacts with the refrigerant has a lot to do with whether or not we are going to realize the efficiencies associated with a system like this. Heat pumps are not new, and it's not just about heat. They actually provide cooling too in what's called a reverse cycle. But you have them in your house if you have a refrigerator. It's very, very well known, understood technology, but the ability to sort of manifest it in the physical facility utilizing geothermal is the most energy efficient way that I know of, and it is a good idea.
Mr. Coulter, can you just let the two that are on the phone, let them know when you're changing a slide? That will help them follow along. Thank you.
Yes, I am now, I can't see slide number, but I'm on the second picture now. You'll see some red collars, and again, those collars are the result of failures at those elbows that were from that air hammering and from some of those things that were occurring. We have actually, since we made changes associated with the pumps ramping up and ramping down and sort of the hunting that was occurring, we have actually not had a line or a PVC line failure in a number of years, and we continue to not have those situations. We continue to monitor them closely, but since we took that and sort of we standardized the way that those pumps work, we have not had that problem, but that occurred multiple years ago. All right, next slide. It's an illustration of sort of how the heat pumps branch off on the supply side and on the return side. So you can see how the heat pumps are, in some situations, actually branched on. HPS is heat pump supply, HPR is heat pump return, and you can see how they branch off from the heat pump on the return side directly back to the 8-inch line, or from the heat pump supply actually to the necessary heat pumps. That's heat pump 2.09, but again, that's one of nearly 200 heat pumps in the facility. We utilize a Climate Master. It's called a Tranquility 27. It's a 2-stage heat pump. It's very, very efficient. It's a very, very nice system. It's quiet. It's very efficient. It was a good selection in the introduction of the project. and the ability for it to work the way that it needs to work, it sort of relies on the way the bore field operates. So the fact that we are in sort of an investigation and cleaning up the bore field right now should put us in the right situation going forward. Next slide. Next slide is entitled GHX Update. Just wanted everybody to see that we are from the folks at Tolin, T-O-L-I-N. Those are the folks that are out there. They're sort of the general contractor per se. There's another contractor out there, Can America, that is actually doing the boring and is actually installing the bore field, and we'll see some pictures on that here in a second as well. We're nearly 80% complete on what's called the fusion and headering. The headering are the supply side and the return side of what's going on. We have actually 10 separate headers, and they have bores individually associated with each of those bores. Those bores are distributed in a manner in the new design to be about 10 per header pair. When I say pair, it means on the return side and on the supply side. For example, one of the issues associated with the original installation, we had 40 bores on a particular header pair, which, as you can imagine, trying to sort of keep the laws of thermodynamics as well as heat pumps and hydraulics, trying to keep those all very, very happy when you have 40 separate bores working and a pump trying to sort of hunt and find various different things, sort of set us up for a situation that was very, very difficult. But the ability to sort of distribute that in an even manner, which is exactly what the new design has done, should put us in a much better situation to do things in a way that's going to be fruitful for us over the long term.
Mr. Coulter, we just have a question via phone.
Okay.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yes, thank you. Can the team hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Under normal conditions, and assuming monument is normal conditions, how long should proper fusion and headering last?
Are you saying how long should the installation of this type of system last in terms of a time, the life cycle?
Yes. Exactly.
50 years. 50 years. That's the beauty of this system as well. It's a great question. A typical heat pump or a typical air conditioning type system, you're looking at 15 to 20 years before major renovation and or maintenance.
Exactly where I'm going.
Okay.
So
well, we talked
provided
about
it
that last
doesn't
night,
cost
right?
double, it's a good operational and financial decision then, yes?
Right. It's a 50-year solution, so it's well understood that that's the way. I mean, there's just not a lot of moving parts. That's the beauty of it. And we're using the earth. The earth becomes sort of our reservoir of heat and temperature.
So just a quick follow-on to make sure that the whole team is together on this with you. Is the reason we're replacing it after less than 50 years because our conditions are different than normal, or because the materials used were wrong, or the quality of installation was incorrect?
Just to give you an example, there were 200 bores in the original installation of the bore field in the original construction. 71 of those 200 bores cannot be found. So it's safe to assume that they don't work properly, and the loop, the way that the loop is worked in terms of the temperature distribution and what's going on in terms of making sure that we are complementing what's going on with the heat pumps relative to the temperature differential that is needed to make a heat pump, a geothermal heat pump system work. I think we just had a situation where the front end wasn't supporting the back end, and the fundamentals of the bore field were just not met.
So, if I may, I don't understand your answer. Was that condition caused by something unique in monuments? Was it caused by a less than standard implementation?
Yeah, I think it's a combination.
Less than standard parts.
From the materials that I have read related to the litigation and the analysis that has been done by Mr. Proffer related to what's going on, the installation, the design and the installation were both compromised.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last three words. They were what? They were both what?
Compromised.
Okay, so as we go forward, what's the confidence level that what is being installed will last the full 50 years?
The confidence level at this time, because of the testing, the calibration, the commissioning that is occurring to the system as it is being put in at this time. For example, we know where all the bores are, whereas which in the past they didn't, you just didn't know where 71 of the 200 bores were. We know where everything is. We know what the performance of everything is. We know what the gallons per minute and the temperature that entering water temperature is. So the commissioning of the system is such that we have very, very positive verification that the system is working and operating the way that it was intended.
And what is your confidence level that it'll last the full 50 years?
At this time, I have no reason to think it wouldn't last 50 years.
So is that 100%, 80%?
100%.
Okay, thank you. And just in the sense of fair play, I'm asking this because we're in a position where we're reinvesting the taxpayers' money prior to when it should be. And we just want to make sure that this reinvestment lasts the full term and that we're doing it right the first time, or in this case, the second time.
Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the slide. It says groundwater temperatures. I guess I misspelled that. Solar thermal conductivity. Everything is about thermal conductivity. And as you can see those lines, I don't know if you can see the temperature, but there is a small number that is next to each of those lines as they sort of stretch across the continental United States. But the temperature that we operate this particular heat pump system is between 35 degrees, the lower 30s, and 85 degrees. And what we're trying to achieve is a delta T. When you have that change in temperature, that delta T, you will have sort of free energy transfer, that being the second law of thermodynamics, where we are able to, in a very, very economically feasible manner, we are able to actually transfer energy utilizing the standard laws of thermodynamics. Basically free. It's free to move temperature, where typically it's not free to move temperature. But especially in Colorado, you can see it's about 50 degrees, 50 to 48, 47 degrees. That's actually an optimal situation for what is going on and for the implementation of geothermal. That's why you don't see a whole lot of geothermal in Arizona, or you don't see a whole lot of geothermal in certain parts of Texas and things of that nature, is because you just don't have that delta T to make sure that those heat pumps can work as efficiently as possible with the refrigerants that are selected. Okay, here's an example. It's a bore field design is the next slide. There's a couple of critical points that are made, and it actually alludes to some of the stuff that I talked to related to the transfer of energy, and that's noted there in the very first sentence. But you can also see in the second or the third paragraph, at the very, very bottom, the designer must find a balance between heat pump fluid, supply, temperature, and the capital cost of the ground loop. The reason why many people shy away from geothermal heat pump systems is because of the first costs associated with the excavation and the boring effort related to the things that we are doing now. It is expensive, but the long-term ramifications are very, very sustainable in the sense of the cost per square foot, as well as where things are going related to energy costs. How you capitalize on that for a 50-year horizon can be very, very advantageous to the building owner and operator. Okay, the next slide is a current visual of where we are related to progress in the bore field that's out there at Palmer Ridge right now. You can see the green lines are the header pairs that are complete. Some lines are actually already being backfilled at this time, but the lines that you see that are in red, and you'll see the darker black dots that are along each of those header pairs. You'll see 10 in every single one of those header pairs, and that's exactly where you want to be. You want to be between somewhere between 8 and 12, but you don't want to be in a situation where one of them is at 40 and the other ones are at 8. Here's a picture. The slide is Borefield Vault. So here's where all the header pairs are going to be coming into, and so here's a picture we took. I think I took it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but you can see some of them. There's actually a header pair. You can't really tell there, but there's actually a header pair that's buried. But that's the manifold that will then lead to the mechanical room in the building.
Quick question here.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. Going back to your map, which I think the slide is GHX Borefield status. From a student safety perspective, is this far enough away from student activity to where we don't have any safety issues?
Oh no, they are well away. I would doubt it if the students have any idea that's going on over there. There is a ridge where they might be able to see some of the equipment, excavators, loaders, and other things that might be moving back and forth up there. But no, there is positive control over everything that's going on over there, especially related to people meandering their way up there. But it's a pretty busy site, and at the same time, you know, that working adjacent to school, that's a conversation we have with them consistently about student safety and staff safety.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. So here's another picture of those header pairs, and as they sort of migrate their way to that to what you saw previously there, and it's sort of the manifold, the largest manifold. Okay, so what happens after the bore field is complete? As a matter of fact, I talked to Tolan Mechanical yesterday, and wanted to let you know. Well, actually, you know, there's a changeover that's going to occur between April 22nd, so here in the next couple of weeks, and April 27th, where we're actually going to move completely to the new bore field, because right now we don't use the bore field at all. We use a loop, a closed loop that's within the mechanical room, just with 2 boilers to maintain temperature and to do the heat transfer we need across the refrigerant and across the coaxial heat exchanger for all the heat pumps. But right now, you can see as we wrap up April, we are going to be utilizing the entering water temperature from the bore field as soon as possible, so that we make sure that we do the necessary testing with the school occupancy the way that we would anticipate it on a typical day of school, so that we're able to do sort of a real-time test as to what's going on. Okay, the slide is PR geothermal steps and geothermal heat exchanger completion. This is step 2. There are a number of different steps that we are going to engage in after the bore field is complete. Some of the things that we want to do is we want to move from right now we have 2 100 horsepower pumps that provide all of the pumping for the system. If you go down into the mechanical room, those pumps are working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and are not exactly the most energy efficient approach to be able to do various different things, as well as understanding that there are relatively, there are locations within the campus that are, it's a 4-level campus, corners in various different north, south, east, west areas where we have classrooms. So the ability to sort of distribute those primary pumps in a way that sort of is going to give us better performance on, better heat pump performance is going to be a great solution, instead of relying on those 100 horsepower pumps to distribute the necessary geothermal, the bore field water to a classroom that is in the upper left-hand corner on the 4th floor on the east side of the building. So that we're going to move, so we've got pumps 1 and 2 right now. Those are the 2 100 horsepower pumps. We would move to pumps. We will actually get rid of pumps 1 and 2 going, as we move forward, and then we will have 9 pumps, these secondary pumps, which is really the focus to move towards a completely secondary distributed pump system, if that makes any sense. But it'll give us better performance relative to the ability to distribute the geothermal, the water from the bore field to the individual heat pumps and to those classrooms. The next slide is PR, geothermal steps continued. That's step 3. Adds, again, 2 more secondary pumps to feed those certain areas. In this particular case, it's the gymnasium and the locker rooms. And then step 4, you can see that again, that would be the removal of the 100 horsepower pumps. And then utilizing pumps 3 and 4, which are actually already installed right now, we start to move towards this completely new pumping system that doesn't rely on those pumps 1 and 2. And you can see it's noted there that we move all the way to pumps 8 and 9 going forward. Again, on PR geothermal steps continued. You can see as we sort of wrap things up, add the final secondary pumps. P8 actually serves level 3 in the classroom wing, and P9 is level 4 of the classroom wing. So it's more into that distributed pumping approach, so that we can give better performance to those heat pumps and to those students that are in those students and staff in those individual classrooms. Okay, moving forward, on April 18th, I will be providing to the board meeting on April 18th, I will be providing a scope of work for the rest of the implementation of those secondary pumps that I just mentioned. Some changes to actually, as you know, there's been some debate as to the use of the glycol mixture, the water and glycol mixture, and the use of PVC pipe. But we will have an approach and a cost estimate for how to implement the things that we feel are best suited to be able to meet a responsible budget and a responsible performance to make sure that we are ready to go for the beginning of next academic year. So April 18th. Inside the COP numbers, COP and EER. Some of you might be very, very interested in the coefficient of performance and the energy efficiency ratio. Related to heat pumps, especially in climates where we are very, very, what we call heating degree days and cooling degree days. We are much more on the side of heating degree days. We are a colder climate. Our average temperature is in the 60s for the course of the year. But you'll see in green there, you can see the energy in, and that's what COP is looking at, energy in versus the energy consumed, and what does that equal? For our heat pumps, and I actually have the data for our Tranquility heat pumps, the Climate Master heat pumps later in this particular slide, but you can see in the red below there, you can see at 4.18, if that coefficient of performance is 4.18, well, so what does that mean? That means that particular heat pump is actually operating at 418% more efficient than a nearly 100% efficient gas furnace. And so that's a good feeling. And I show you the numbers there. I don't know if anybody's interested in how many watts per BTU, but it's all about BTUs, how much energy is needed, how much energy is provided, and then the BTUs associated with the energy consumed. That's how we do that calculation, and that's how we sort of make the assessment that the geothermal system is a high efficiency system.
Question on that?
Yes.
How do we relate that to dollars spent or saved on a net basis per year? And
Well,
how do we convert that to carbon footprint savings or expenditure?
It's a great question. Related to, I think we look at both BTUs, how it manifests itself for us. It's going to be in kilowatts and or kilowatt hours in the utility bill. So those things that we have done so far is we look at something like Lewis Palmer High School, which runs without a geothermal system and operates with a much more, sort of a typical system in terms of heating and cooling, utilizing natural gas and electricity. And then on the carbon side of things, we would want to look at what the carbon footprint associated with the electricity that's consumed, the natural gas that's consumed for the totality of the building, and the location of the utility that's providing that. For example, Colorado Springs Utilities has a lower carbon footprint on their natural gas than the utility that we utilize. So it's a lot of different things. It's the math associated with it, but it's standard. It's a standard math equation associated with the amount of carbon per BTU and or per kilowatt hour and or per kilowatt that we would want to use and evaluate. But we can certainly continue. We can start tracking that.
Yeah, so I have an ask in that regard then for April 18th. Since we'll have a revised estimate of the expenditure, can we also calculate the return on our stakeholders' investment?
Absolutely.
In dollars compared to doing it the traditional way?
Absolutely.
And in terms also of carbon footprint delta.
Can
In
do.
other words, if we did it the same way Lewis Palmer did it from its inception to now, and from now for the next 50 years, which you said there's a very, very high confidence level that this system will be quite solid for the next 5 decades, what that means in terms of our contribution to the environment.
We will. We'll make sure that that's a part of the analysis on the 18th.
One of the beautiful things about a system like this is it makes fiscal and environmental sense.
Correct. Agreed.
And obviously we've been in the unfortunate position where it didn't make operational sense, and it looks like you're on a wonderful path to repair that for the next 5 decades for the good of our students, staff, and community.
Absolutely. No, this is a great system. Okay, the heat pump cycle, again, I mean, everybody sort of calls it a heat pump cycle, but it's the refrigeration cycle. Again, it's what you utilize in everybody's kitchen. You have a refrigerator. That is, you could call it, you could call it a refrigeration cycle, or you could call it a heat pump cycle, but it's essentially the exact same thing. It is charged with an amount of refrigerant. That refrigerant is either compressed or expanded, and then what you utilize in your kitchen, I don't know if you've spent a lot of time behind your refrigerator, but you'll probably find that it's pretty warm back there. And that's because that's where that heat is going, because after you compress it, it's going to sort of distribute that heat as sort of waste heat. But that's one of the things, that's the beauty of the geothermal system, is it's able to grab that heat and actually put that refrigerant back into a situation where it's easily compressed, utilizing a significantly less amount of electricity to compress that refrigerant. Okay, so what are the elements of a heat pump? Again, there are 4 different elements. There's the compressor, and this kind of goes through where it starts. The compressor is where things start. Then things move, the refrigerant moves through the condenser, then it moves to the expansion device, and then it moves to sort of the business end of the refrigeration cycle, the evaporator, where the air actually transfers with, whether it's cooled. We call it heat. Heat is sort of heat's not a temperature. Heat is just where the matter and where the molecules are. But it's either sort of on a temperature side of things. Temperature is different than heat in the sense that temperature is about the movement of those molecules, whereas heat is just the number of different molecules. But and then it moves back from the evaporator back to the compressor. It's a standard cycle. Utilizing pressure and temperature, but mostly pressure to move that refrigerant from one device to the next. Here's a visual illustration. The slide title is Refrigeration Cycle. So again, it starts with the compressor, moves to the condenser. The expansion valve sort of opens things up, and things become it becomes either a lower pressure refrigerant on that side of things. On the evaporator side versus the condenser side, I want to sort of blend it into sort of how is the bore field utilized in those situations. On the condenser side of things, heat is transferred from the refrigerant in that situation to the bore field. On the evaporator side of things, heat is transferred from the bore field to the refrigerant. So that's, you might want to ask, why the investment in what's going on in the bore field? That's where, again, the condenser and the evaporator. Otherwise, where is that heat and where is that temperature going to go? It's going to go into the building, and you're going to have to combat it in another way. This way, utilizing the bore field and utilizing the geothermal system, it's a free system in that particular sense in terms of the energy and the effort that's used to be able to move that heat and move that temperature from one place to another. Step 1, and we've talked a little bit about this and I don't know if we want to spend a lot of time on it, but again, we start with the compressor. The compressor is where it all starts. What you're receiving is a low pressure, you're going to receive what's called a low pressure gas from the compressor. It's going to be a much higher pressure gas, and it is, because it's a low pressure gas, moving it from a low pressure gas to a high pressure gas, that is not an energy intensive or electricity intensive effort. So that's one of the beautiful things about this particular system. This is just a picture, so that you understand. So where is the water traveling and where is the refrigerant? Well, they're both in what's called this coaxial heat exchanger. On the outsides of that coaxial heat exchanger, which we have a section through here, that's where the refrigerant lies, and that's where the refrigerant is taking the temperature, or again, the second law of thermodynamics, that free energy transfer process between the water temperature, and again, that water temperature does matter, because if the refrigerant's already hot and the water's already hot, and then there's obviously not much heat transfer. But if that water is, like it is in Colorado, 47 degrees, that's a good situation to get the refrigerant where it needs to be, so we can, in an electricity, in a minimal electricity manner, we can actually compress that refrigerant. This is a picture of what's called a scroll compressor, and what you can see, this is what's going on in a compressor. You can see it getting tighter and tighter and tighter with those molecules, and what happens with those molecules, we talked about energy. The amount of energy is basically defined, or the number of molecules is that energy, but as you get it tighter and tighter and tighter, as you can imagine, those molecules are moving faster and faster and faster. It's kind of like that scene in Star Wars where they're sort of in that place and they're being compressed, the very, very first Star Wars, and all of a sudden the walls are starting to come in that situation. That's what's happening to those molecules of that refrigerant. You're compressing it and compressing it and compressing it, and you're moving it from that low pressure gas to a high pressure gas. And that temperature is...
Question here.
Okay.
Is this similar to linear acceleration?
Linear acceleration.
I don't know. I can't speak to linear acceleration. I'm a dirt engineer, and yeah, I can tell you whether or not I can tell you about concrete, but I don't know about linear acceleration. I'll find out. I will find out.
I can look it up.
Okay.
It appears to be that way. Keep going. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so then...
Chris, just an aside, where the Palmer Ridge Bears today, are you suggesting Palmer Ridge Jedi?
You know what? I like your idea. I like your idea. We could start a trend. You know what they do with the athletes now. That now they can market themselves and make money off themselves. But as we move into heat pump step 2, and I can run. I mean, you can see the expansion. I don't know if we want to run through all of these different things. But this is the working end. We mentioned it on the evaporator side of things. So just so you know, those coils are either from a temperature perspective, they're either hot or they're cold based on where the refrigerant is, and you've either expanded it or compressed it. But when air moves across that, that's an evaporation process, and that's how you're cooling and/or heating those particular classrooms or those particular spaces.
Ron and Matt, for your FYI, we are on slide step 4, the evaporator.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, so here's a water source heat pump. That's the title of the slide. But you can see the biggest thing in there is the compressor. But again, the compressor is that item that is going to be tied in. There are very, very few things that are moving and or consuming electricity in a heat pump. The compressor is one of those things. But if you can sort of normalize the refrigerant so it is not going to require an extraordinary amount of effort to either compress and raise the temperature of that refrigerant to where you want it to be, and that's what the bore field water is able to do. You can see probably in the middle there, you can see the coaxial heat exchanger, and that's the sort of the rounded item that you kind of can see. And those are the things that the water and the refrigerant are in that same coil, and they're wrapped up together. Well, what's happening there is you're able to disperse unneeded heat or unneeded temperature associated with what's going on with the refrigerant, and put the compressor in a situation where it's not going to take a whole lot of electricity and or effort to be able to get the refrigerant to where you want it to make the folks in the classroom happy and comfortable.
I have a question on this one.
Yes.
So earlier when you said that, spoke to the confidence of this working over 50 years and not needing to replace it versus a furnace or a boiler. What is the life or shelf life of condensers, expansion device, evaporator, and the compressor?
Well, all of these things are going to require the necessary preventative. I mean, you've got 177 of these in the building, so they're all going to require the necessary preventative maintenance and various different things, changing filters, checking belts and things like that. But you can see it's a very, very closed system. I mean, all these systems are actually sitting inside of each of the classrooms that are out there. And I don't know if we've had any complaints about noise or things that are going on, or how these heat pumps are interrupting the activities of what's going on in the classroom. But these things are literally located, adjacent or just above, or in the middle of a particular classroom. The number of moving parts that are associated with a heat pump being minimal, and we are just processing through pressure. That's how we are moving the refrigerant from one point to another and we are actually generating the heat or the cooling associated with this. There's just not a lot of moving parts, hence the 50-year life cycle associated with something like this. Heat pumps are very, very common, and it's really they're usually the sort of if you don't have a whole lot of money, go with a heat pump. So they're very cost effective, and the maintenance on these items is very routine.
Okay.
Okay, so now the slide I'm on is our climate. Are we a heating or cooling sensitive? Especially when we look at things like EER and COP and things of that nature, we are most interested in COP because COP has a lot more to do with a location that has the climate like we have. We have an average maximum temperature in Colorado Springs of 62 degrees and an average minimum temperature of 35 degrees. So I wouldn't call us a situation. We're not in a situation where we do a ton of air conditioning. I mean, some people certainly probably want more than others, but a lot of people live without it. A lot of schools live without it because of the very, very pleasant conditions and the high altitude and dry air conditions that we have in Colorado. So it's very, very advantageous to what's going on. We have what's called on our air handlers and energy recovery units, what's called an Economizer. So if in fact that temperature outside is 70 degrees, we can actually bring that air in versus doing something that's a conditioned system associated with what's going on in the occupied space, and that saves money as well. Well, here's a slide I just put together. So what I looked at is the number of what's called heating degree days. I don't know if everybody understands or is familiar with what's called heating degree days and cooling degree days associated with our climate. You generate it based on, you look at the average temperature of a particular day, the high and the low, and the average temperature, and you compare it to 65 degrees. The note at the very, very bottom where it says the total number of cooling degree days in 2021, looking very, very recently, was less than 900. It's a 661% increase in the number of needed what's called heating degree days versus cooling degree days in Colorado Springs in 2021. We are a colder weather climate. We are not in a situation where we are very, very sensitive to cooling degree days and requirements associated with cooling. And you can see the interesting thing is since 2013, the 4 coldest years that we have seen, since 2012, the 4 coldest years that we have seen are actually 2012 and then 2018, 19, and 21, or 20 and 21. So if you were to say things feel colder, it's because they are. It is. It's getting colder. So us being on a geothermal system and this geothermal heat pump system is actually the most energy efficient situation we could be in. So this is a good situation.
Could you explain this a little more? Like the yellow. So what the yellow is?
The yellow at the bottom?
Yep.
The yellow at the bottom is just looking at the total number. You'll see the column there. It says total heating degree days, and the yellow is below that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just looked at the total number of heating degree days since 2012, and sort of ranked them, from 1 to 4, just to let folks know the last couple of years that we have seen have been the coldest years we've seen in quite some time. So the use of a geothermal heat pump system that we are using at Palmer Ridge really makes a ton of sense.
And then can you explain what the 4-digit and 3-digit numbers actually represent?
Those are the number of heating degree days. So if you take, for example, if you take a particular day and you look at the average temperature, the high and the low, and you take the average, and then you compare it to 65, and that you subtract it or add it, in terms of what that delta is between the average temperature and 65, that will be the number of heating or cooling degree days for that particular day. So looking across each month, January through December, you can see, and what I noted in there is the number of heating degree days in each one of those months. And the ones that I put in red were sort of the extremes. So, and then again, we're seeing it in 2022. February, for example, in 2022 was the coldest we've seen since 2012. So things are continuing in that particular trend associated with, if you were to say, hey, the winters feel colder here than they've felt in the past, this is the proof that you would have to support that.
Okay.
And this is actually from, it's called Weather Data Depot. It's something that's online, but this is actually the trend, and you can kind of see, if you see that top line that shows that yellow is 2019. In 2019, it was sort of a worst case scenario, and you'll look back at your data on the previous slide. You'll see that's where the most number of heating degree days occurred. But you can see where the trend is. The trend is towards it's getting colder related to what's going on. I'm not making a cardinal decision about the world or the Earth's climate. Not at all. I'm just trying to make the point that utilizing this system right now makes really a lot of sense. Okay, these are the things related to EER and COP for the heat pumps that we have installed. Again, I would sort of ask you to sort of look at COP because I think it's more appropriate. EER actually uses a benchmark temperature of 95 degrees. We don't see 95 degrees a whole lot, so all of that data is a little bit skewed, whereas COP uses temperatures more in line exactly with where we are here in Colorado, as well as it just looks at the energy in versus the energy out. But again, those numbers, you can see it's sort of a two-stage system. You see 4.8 and 4.0 and 4.5s and things like that. So what that means is it's 480% more efficient than a 100% efficient furnace or other system to heat your space. So it's a very, very good solution from an energy mindedness and a day-to-day cost associated with the operation of the system. But these are actually the heat pumps that are in our building. Just wanted to give everybody a little bit of an update on where energy costs are going. We are mostly on the commercial side of things. We do have some tariffs for our facilities that are on a residential side of things, but you can see both of them are about 10% over the course since 2020. You can see where things are going. Utility costs are going up year after year after year, but for the course of those 4 years, nearly 11% on the commercial side, which most of our larger buildings are certainly on the commercial tariff side of things. This was an interesting slide that I thought I would point out. I didn't know this, and I don't know, maybe I'm just sort of being a little bit anecdotal, but I had no idea that coal accounts for as much of the electricity, the contribution to electricity generation in America as nuclear energy does. Had no idea. Nuclear is certainly what I would regard as clean energy, but you can see where natural gas is. If in fact natural gas, and you can see a lot of schools and I read yesterday that New York is moving completely away from natural gas. Natural gas is cheap. Natural gas is great, and it's a low carbon emission resource. I get the bituminous side of things, but natural gas is moving away from natural gas is going to make things cost more and more and more. The other thing on the renewable side of things, you would think that solar is the largest contributor to the renewable 20%. It's actually wind and hydro. It's all about wind and hydro, and really, you see where wind is growing. Wind is actually the greatest contributor on what we would call on the renewable side of things, which was, it's a little bit interesting.
See those windmills everywhere.
Right.
So on that point,
Yes, sir.
we'll likely see hydro go up significantly as a percentage of your top line there. There was just some legislation put in front of the national legislature that will likely go through, enabling significantly more hydroelectric power generation on federal Native American lands. So it's likely that will supplement some of the solar not coming online as fast as they thought. So if we look at this again in 5 years, that'll be another source.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, it all gets back to the provider. It gets back to what they, the transmission lines is what it's all about. What do you have at the transmission lines? What do you have at those substations that you actually have access to? And can you get to those substations to actually distribute that power in an economical way to your facilities? So that's the situation, and those are some of the conversations we're having with Mountain View Electric right now. But this is just sort of anecdotal. And then this is just another slide that actually looks into the forecast, looks into 2023. And you can see where natural gas continues to drop down, unfortunately, in my opinion. And you can also see where coal, continues to drop. But you see on that green side of things, on the renewables, is the one thing that you see sort of a positive vector associated with what's going on. So, the wind and the solar seems to continue to be, doing what it needs to do. And you can see on the hydro, it actually has its own independent line there. So hydro's, again, it's almost 10% of the total renewables portfolio. So that just looks at where things are going. So you just have some visibility as to where energy rates and electricity rates might end up. That concludes my briefing.
I had one question.
Yes, sir.
You talked about early on about the hydraulic expansion, contraction,
Emery?
and that causing some problems for us, right? Is that the primary source of the leakage that's occurred in the past?
In my assessment, yes, because we have not had, and the reason why, I'm not basing it on some kind of technical, I'm some kind of technical authority, but we have not had another problem since we made the changes, and
Right.
we got away from the hammering.
And do you have a picture of where those leaks occur?
Absolutely.
Can you go back to that slide?
Absolutely. This was just a couple. These are those 8-inch lines, and that's where, if in fact we had any leaks, they were occurring on the 8-inch lines.
And that's inside the building, right?
Yes.
Yep.
This is immediately adjacent. For example, that's a scabbed-in piece, and those copper lines right there are actually feeding heat pumps directly.
Now, again, just so I understand it, what changed that eliminated the leaks?
Oh, the removal of the hammering.
Yeah.
Well, it was the pumps at the manifolds that are in the bore field. What they were seeing relative to what they were seeing on the bore field loop is a closed loop. So what it was seeing, again, I alluded to it earlier, we had certain bore pairs that had 40 separate, or header pairs that had 40 separate bores. We had some that had 9, we had some that had 12, we had some that had 14. So you can imagine some of them we can't even find anymore. So the ability to sort of get flow through those header pairs, if those pumps are not seeing the necessary flow to get that into the building, they're going to start hunting for something else. When they hunt, they're going to shut down, and then all of a sudden, once they find it, they're going to slam everything back on. So you're going to all of a sudden go from nothing to something. And again, that's why they call it that hydraulic shock. That shock sort of matriculates or sort of cascades itself through the system. If in fact you have any breaks or loose pieces, elbows, that's where we saw these various different things. It's going to create a leak.
So that was the cause, and what changed that eliminated this root cause?
We removed the requirement for those pumps to begin hunting, shut things down and start to begin hunting. So they operate now at a standard pressure all the time. There is no more hunting for those various different pressures.
Are those
that they need.
adjustments electronic or mechanical?
No, it's controlled. It's what we call I guess the controls on how those pumps are controlled and monitored. That's how we did that.
Which are electronic then?
Oh yes.
Yeah, okay.
Oh yes. Yeah, they're actually in the vault. They're in that vault. The picture that I showed.
Very
those pumps
good.
in there.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, just one. Are there any dynamics that have not been mentioned? Oh, let me back up. Thank you for the comprehensiveness of this presentation. Are there any dynamics that have not been mentioned in this presentation that can cause undue stress on the system and therefore unexpected maintenance?
Well, the assessment from the engineers that I have read in the litigation, and perhaps other folks have had the opportunity to read that litigation, the engineers, Mr. Proffer, as well as Beth Doty, who is the engineer that designed the new system, Their assessment is flat out that it's the glycol mixture, and the use of Schedule 4 in our particular situation is Schedule 40 PVC is an unfit installation. We should be using steel and some other type of coupling solution, Victaulic couples or another system. But to remove all of the PVC, in the building, knowing that we've had multiple years, and we're moving to a 15% glycol mixture. It was 15%, but we'll probably move down in terms of the amount of glycol that we will utilize in the system. I think an assessment can be made as to whether or not glycol is the cause of some of the problems and/or failures and cracking in those critical PVC connections. We need to continue to investigate that. Some forensic evidence is going to be needed, and that's what we're going to be doing as part before we get to the April 18 assessment and the recommendation.
Excellent. Anything else, Dr. Summers?
No, I just appreciate how Chris has come in and tackled this big thing, and looking forward to next steps.
I'm glad you had a keen interest in geothermal.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to make it work. It's going to be great.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank
Our
you
next
so much.
You're very welcome.
board session item is D3, Schneider Electric Update, with Will Benish, Robert Davidson, and John Stancliffe. Good.
Awesome.
Morning, Will. Thank you.
This looks very readable. Thank you.
It's heavyweight paper too. I said, "Can I have it?" And you said, "No."
Okay, good morning, Board of Education, Dr. Somers, rest of the staff. Thank you so much for having us in here once again. It's so great to see all of you. Great presentation, Chris. Again,
Yeah.
Chris has been newly introduced to the ongoing project as well. It's been great working alongside him with Bob's transition, and now having him work alongside our construction team. So once again, my name is Will Benish, Program Manager for D38 here. Alongside me, I have John Stancliffe, our Project Construction Manager for the ongoing construction of this energy efficiency and capital recovery project. And of course, Robert Davidson, Project Development Manager, who is partner in crime, do a lot of development of the work that's been done. Before I begin, Dr. Somers, how much time would you say?
Mr. Taylor, I'd defer to you, sir. 20 minutes, roughly? Does that sound good?
Or 15.
15 is even better. Thanks, Will. Thanks for checking.
Absolutely, definitely. The purpose of today is to really go through the construction progress that has been done thus far on this project, as well as what's moving forward. If we're talking about the greater scope of work, which we'll take a look once more at, really only a few pieces of that scope have been completed thus far. The majority of the scope will be completed really this summer and going into the later half of this year, and John will talk a little bit more about that as we get in. Some of this will be refreshers and really just a way for us to re-energize some of the conversation that we had way back when in June when we were moving this project forward. But again, re-emphasizing that there will be so much more visibility of this project this summer, especially with a lot of the items that students, teachers, and staff will be able to see. So we want to make sure that that is publicized, that's shared, that we're collaborating with the district on that, and that this, this partnership is successful as we keep moving forward. So if there are any questions, feel free to, of course, stop and ask. But I will let John and Robert and myself sort of kick things off here. So as we jump into the agenda. Oh, geez, I'm the one who controls this. All right, there we go. So again, just recap of the scope of work, share that construction timeline. Most importantly, how we're going to communicate these changes that staff and faculty, principals, teachers, students will see inside of their facilities. The marketing efforts, the communication efforts associated with the district's goal number 5 of increasing community engagement. And then student engagement, just another piece I want to touch on as we wrap up. This is more of a refresher here, but again, looking back to way back when we discussed the initial, the purpose of this entire project, being able to help the district enable their greater strategic vision, specifically with goals 1, 4, and 5. And for those on the phone, I am on the addressing D38's challenges slide right there. So we were tasked with challenges as we were in our investment grade audit to focus heavily on priority number 1A, which is security. In the summer of last year, we built, constructed those security vestibules at those 3 school sites. And the functionality of those schools are there. We'll talk a little bit more about the additional work that'll be happening with those vestibules this summer. But that was priority number 1A. There were complaints on the side of lighting, on heating and cooling from the staff and faculty that we focused a lot of attention toward, that we felt like was important to goal number 1, in ensuring that we have welcoming and healthy school environments. The limited funding capacity, there's, I believe if I'm recalling from Bob Foster's list, 75 to 100 line items of priorities of deferred maintenance at this school district that I know Chris is now handling a lot of on his own. But ensuring that the funding could be there through this unique program of ensuring that utility savings are recognized and that they're guaranteed by Schneider Electric. And lastly, the desire for additional transparency. Throughout the IGA, we spend a lot of time doing that, and once construction is complete, we'll be going back to the same stakeholders that we once spoke with to talk about the work that has been done, ensuring that they're satisfied. And if there are any changes that need to be made, we want to know exactly what that looks like to ensure that that comfortable learning environment has been set. Those are the big challenges that we took on in the investment grade audit, and in this construction progress, we're going to show that, we're going to prove that. Once again, this slide should look very familiar, all those fun colors that are popping up with goals 1, 4, and 5, the safe, healthy, and welcoming school environments, effective asset management, and forging strong community relationships. The scope of work, once again, as a refresher, if you're taking a look at this, as I mentioned at the beginning, really only a minority amount of this work has been completed thus far around the vestibules, the implementation of the plug load controls, the interior security walls, and we actually just started the building automation system implementation as of last week. 2 weeks ago, absolutely. So really, the majority of the work, as we'll talk here in just a second with this timeline, is yet to be done, which of course will ensue the ability to promote the majority of this scope and promote this project in the best way that we can. So I'll turn it over to John to talk a little about the timeline of events, and then we'll keep moving forward with the construction.
Thank you, Will. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to first compliment Chris on his presentation. From a nuts and bolts engineer, the dirt engineer got it right. So it was great. As you know, we kicked off construction in June of 2021. The first thing was the security vestibules. We did get the walls up. We had several challenges we're working through with door closures and things of that nature, but we're making progress. We have some quality as far as some cosmetics that will get resolved on those vestibules this summer. This coming summer that will get completed. We have also executed the plug load scope of work. We're at about a 90% level on that completion. The only thing we have to go back is a lot of the charging carts in a lot of the schools suddenly disappeared. So we had to go find them, figure out what we're doing, and we've got that resolved now. So we have a plan moving forward. In June, we'll implement the rest of that scope of work. The automation design started in September of 2021. It was a big effort. It took dozens of people. They made several trips out here. They've been through the majority of the sites. The design is complete on the Schneider Electric side of the scope of work. The long building technology scope at the Lewis Palmer High School is in progress. They're at about a 50% point right now on their design. And as Will had mentioned earlier, we have started construction at Palmer Lake. I always get the schools messed up. Palmer Lake Elementary School, we have started construction. We're pulling wire in that school, and we should have controls being installed within a few weeks. So it's an exciting time for everybody. This summer, we will be doing the plumbing fixture upgrades, and also the lighting construction we'll execute this summer. One of the challenges, I think, in the last few years since we've all been through this pandemic, the construction industry is seeing an unprecedented challenge in materials procurement and shipping. So we've been trying to manage that as best we can. I wanted to thank the district for working with us and helping us, because we ordered a lot of our materials ahead of time, and we've been storing those at Bear Creek Elementary School, and we really appreciate the district helping us do that. That has allowed us to do a lot of this construction this summer, where a lot of contractors are having issues obtaining materials and keeping schedules going. The automation scope of work will extend into the 2023 period. We discussed trying to push it and get 2 buildings done at a time. I don't want to really sacrifice quality over quantity. I want to make sure we get this right. Schneider takes a lot of pride in their automation systems and all of the work that we do. We intend to deliver to the district the best quality that we can. So moving forward, that's how we're going to execute.
And just to make sure, for those that aren't here in person, we are on the project construction timeline moving forward slide, where John was briefly highlighting the remaining construction. And if you are here in person, we handed out just a schedule summary that breaks out per site what scope items are to be completed where. So, I mean, if you'll see really in 2022 as we enter June, a majority, or really the end of May, a majority of that construction does kick off. And John mentioning that work will kick into early 2023, but not at the entire district, really only at a few sites. A majority of the work, if not mostly all of the work, will be completed by then. John, do you want to briefly talk a little bit about closeout, what happens then, especially as construction wraps up?
Well, I mean, an important aspect of the automation systems and even the mechanical systems is that we're commissioning them. The Colorado Energy Office requires it. Schneider does it as a standard. So part of the closeout process is ensuring that we've completed everything the way it needs to be done and that the owners accepted each phase of the project. So as we go to each campus and each scope of work, I'm going to go look to Chris to actually review the systems and accept them one at a time as we go through it. So the final completion phase, that'll be in February and March of 2023 when we put together all the documentation and we get everything together, and that closes the project out. But the final construction, right now I have the district office as the last place to get controls. That may move depending on when we get materials. There's a chip shortage that's impacting everybody, and that impacts controls.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to be is very flexible in my schedule. If I can get materials quick enough, I can move things up in the schedule. If I can't get them fast enough, we have to kind of revert back, and maybe I'll do the district office sooner.
I have a couple of questions around this reporting. So you said you report to the Colorado Energy Office. What's the periodic? How often do you report to them? And is it?
Yeah, so the Colorado Energy Office gets the commissioning reports at the end of the project and a post-installation report, which reanalyzes the performance that we would expect based on any changes or details that came up during the construction phase. And then we also provide them the annual savings reports as well throughout the course of the project. And then we also have an obligation to report to them any variations in performance. So if something has changed or is interfering with the district's ability to go realize the savings for some sort of reason, we have an obligation to also report that in real time.
So how long will you report to the Colorado Energy Office about D38? 5 years into the future?
For 3 years
For
of the
3
guarantee
years.
period.
So 3 years after March of next year, the closeout, after the closeout, 3 more years, you'll be reporting essentially results of the project to the Colorado Energy Office. Understood. No, understood. But that's a third-party oversight that we have in place. Then you mentioned these specific site closeouts that we're doing. Have you developed a plan of how that is being communicated via our website, or, how is that being communicated? I'm just curious about it.
Do you want to go first, Will?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, actually, on the very next slide, and I can show that communication with staff, faculty, about specifically with thermostats on this slide, but with I'll give a great example tomorrow. Dr. Summers invited us to go out to the monthly principals meeting and to speak to all the principals about the changes in regarding to the display of the thermostats, but also the set point changes. Because in order for us to ensure that the guarantee is being met, that savings are being realized, there are slight variations to the temperature, to the heating and cooling that we'll need to make sure that principals are able to be knowledgeable about and share with their teachers. As of course the majority of the automation is starting right now, we're really going into fall of 22. That's going to be taken into effect. That's just an example of one way we're going to be doing it. John, do you want to talk about how we sort of train also the facility management side?
Well, I still have
Sorry, go ahead.
more of a general question on this communication. So we have Schneider Electric has a responsibility to report to the Colorado Energy Association for 3 years post-closing here. Do we have a similar plan of internal communications or within the district communications because you're going to be reporting results, is what I ask, right? So how do we, communicate in the community the same kind of thing? And maybe it's the same thing, we just link to it or something.
Yeah, essentially, that's exactly where I was going, Mr. Taylor. While we haven't formalized a specific series of dates yet, per se, this has to be shared far and wide. So not only will it be part of an ongoing or periodic update that we can share with the board and also with the community. Obviously, we've got an excellent communications department that can help us push the word out in multiple ways. So yeah, as the work is progressing this summer, I think we would envision opportunities to showcase that and celebrate it and make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of the what as well as the why, and if they're interested, some of the how.
And I'm not trying to create new work, I'm just trying to piggyback on what's required anyway.
Sure.
Absolutely.
I have a question that kind of ties into what Chris is saying, and I can either wait till the end or bring it now. So when we're talking about that communication piece and that engagement with our stakeholders and our building and grounds and our maintenance crew are our boots on the ground in our buildings. So when you're going through the communication process, are we making sure that their input and their insights into their buildings are also that it's a two-way communication?
So I'll give John a chance to answer about the construction phase. I'll first answer about the post-construction ongoing performance phase. We do provide a monthly report that's more technically oriented. That'll go towards Leo and Chris to give feedback about performance and have an opportunity for a dialogue about what's going on and if there are any challenges and if there are things that have changed or anything we need to deal with. John, if you want to add on the construction phase.
Sure. During the construction phase, we have a site superintendent and we have validation engineers on the automation team. They work hand in hand with the personnel that are on site. So you have site managers, if need be the principals, and we can answer questions. We can go back if we need to make changes to how we program the systems, for example. We're more than willing to do that. We just have to look at how it impacts energy savings, and if it impacts the energy savings, then we have to, basically develop a way of going back to the original plan and amending it.
Okay, so how are we making sure that we're not adding more burden they're a district asset also, they're our employees, so ensuring that we're not adding more burden to their list of job duties that they're working on a day-to-day basis, that we're making sure that your superintendents are getting your stuff done and that our district grounds and building and maintenance are still making sure that they're getting their side done and that there's two-way dialogue and collaboration, but also ensuring and being respectful of each other's time and energy and efforts is what I'm hearing you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing that Schneider excels at is when we go into the classrooms, when we leave, we want to make sure that we were never there. So the teachers won't know we were there. If they know we were there, I made a mistake. So we should not be impacting anyone, any of the staff. When we go in and do construction, we go in, when we get out, and hopefully we don't impact their job at all. That's the goal. And then ultimately what we're doing is we're replacing lighting and automation. We're taking burden away from them when we get completed.
Yeah, Ms. Upchurch, I know it's been a while since we've had this type of dialogue, but what I'd like to remind you is we have been, and our team has been, extremely collaborative in this entire process, from the original design or redesign, given the fact that we're reducing our controls from the 7 that we had down to 2 now. And that's just at a high level, one of the main changes that we're seeing. All of this work is designed for us to be more efficient, more effective. And while I appreciate your concern on that, our team will absolutely let us know what they see, what they think, what they're feeling. We take our cue from them. So I'd love for Leo or whoever is, part of this to also ensure that this is not anything that is adding to. It's really about the plate has been recreated, if you will. So happy to talk more about that, but it's just definitely part of everything that we've been doing this entire time.
Yeah, and just last thing to mention, there is absolutely formal training to all maintenance and operational staff at the district, as of course new equipment's being, we're not just handing them over this and saying, good luck, here's a manual. We have ongoing staff, ongoing training during the time that we're measuring these energy and operational savings. We have an entire team called Line Services that's dedicated to that maintenance and operations staff to ensure that there's a hotline available, but if anything's happening, they have a line of communication immediately, or I will come out, whatever needs to be done.
Chris, if I could, perhaps to your point, and for the community at large who might be listening, kudos to Mr. Belcher, who has kept up the Schneider Electric partnership part of the website. So all of the board presentations are accessible there, as well as a number of the graphics that you've shared. And so I think that's really helpful for the community and for everybody to know what's going on and the timeline. Thank you.
Sorry. Absolutely, and I was going to bring up the district partnership website because there's quite a bit of communication that needs to be done this summer. So as we move forward here, keeping mindful of time. So communication with the district staff and faculties. I mentioned re-engaging the folks that we did speak with during the investment grade audit to talk about the results from construction is extremely important. We take that very seriously because these are the people that are living and breathing inside of these facilities once construction is completed. As I also mentioned, tomorrow we'll be meeting with those principals to discuss those temperature set point changes to ensure that there's comfortability and understanding of what that might look like. Hoping to come back out here in front of the board once again this summer as construction, in many aspects of the scope will be wrapping up, but also to make sure that there is, a direct line to the community through these meetings. We did mention that during construction, the district will be realizing utility cost savings. Once lights are installed, you don't have to wait till closeout, to start realizing savings. Those savings will be recognized and realized as well. And I think that's a really important piece to communicate, especially as we're utilizing, the district partnership website and different forms of media there. And I'll go right on to the next slide here because I will talk about marketing communications as it is so important. Mark doesn't know this yet, but him and I are going to become very good friends this summer. But as we do kick off the work this summer, I was actually on the phone with our marketing director yesterday to talk about signage, specifically large banners that we will place at 3 or 4 specific sites where there's a lot of foot traffic, be able to display, of course, the things that are important about this project, like the scope of work, but also the results that are coming from it. That the district's going to realize nearly 10 million plus of utility cost savings over the next 20 years, and the importance that comes behind that with the scope of work. So we'll talk about the association of the strategic vision with goals 1, 4, and 5, and ensure that when people see those signs and have questions, they have a line of communication. I think we're thinking about including a QR code on our banner so people could just take us. Everyone's good with QR codes now. Take a photo of it. It goes right to the district partnership webpage. They could learn about the project, and if they have any questions, there's a line of communication there. I know I've spoken about this before. Post-project video. This is more of a public and publicity sort of avenue that we take, especially on projects that are extremely unique and extremely diverse, such as the one here at D38 that includes, security components, that includes tackling problems that have been, on the district's radar for over a decade now. I saw a few examples of updated social media posts that our team is considering implementing this summer. So a direct line to Mark Belcher is definitely going to be the winning solution there and ensuring that we're all on the same page. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about student engagement, but we're hoping to host our second annual student engagement event here in early May, hopefully before testing takes place. So we'll talk about timing there. But we're interested in working with the Plant Gardening Club over at Lewis Palmer High School, as well as perhaps over at Prairie Winds, consider another round of solar car racing. So definitely just another way to publicize the importance behind Earth Day, also share information about the project, but emphasize and hold true to the student engagement piece of this project initiative. So a lot of planning in place, so we'll need to be strong communications this summer, but we're really excited about it. There's a lot of work to do, and we're ready for it. What do I have next here? Speaking of which, Phillips, we have our district. I just had a screenshot here just to make sure everyone saw. It's under the community tab. Definitely could use some I will help out with some updating as well, because there is more information to share, including this presentation. But definitely a good avenue and a good way for folks to interact with the project. Lastly, student engagement update, because there has been more happening. And Mark and Dr. Summers were directly involved with this event. We held our first annual Students in STEAM event here at the Discovery Science Center back in October, and we thought it was extremely successful. We were able to have over 40 to 50 students from several different school districts in El Paso County come out for a free day of learning about STEAM-oriented education and host different fun activities for them to work as a team. Robert was out there, myself. John wanted to be there, he couldn't, sadly. But we had leaders, we had members from NASA, Ball Aerospace, the Discovery Science Center, engineers from our team that told students their stories about how they got to where they are today as engineers, as leaders in their industry, and we thought it was really powerful. So a wonderful event. We're hoping to host it again at that time next year, or I guess later this year. But just another way we're trying to promote, of course, the project initiative, but the importance behind what's going on. So just an example there that we're really proud of. I don't know if I hit 15 minutes, but that is everything we had. We just wanted to make sure the timing for construction was recognized, the efforts moving forward was recognized, and if there are any questions, we're here to answer them.
I had one more question, and that is, we just spent 45 minutes learning about geothermal. When you did the energy performance contract audit in first part of 2021, did you take into account the geothermal project that's now underway?
So we
You're
knew
smiling, so you...
we were well aware of that project, and we wanted to make sure that the district's plans could be followed through with. So we basically limited our scope to not really involve the HVAC system at that site, at Palmer Ridge.
So our contract and our reporting requirements to Colorado Energy Office it excludes the geothermal project.
That's correct.
Okay. But not the high school. Understood.
I have two questions. So first of all, I want to say thank you for your forethought and future planning with getting materials purchased and stored up, so that we're not scrambling and competing and fighting for whatever we can get our hands on. Everything, I didn't realize everything's stored at Bear Creek. So as the projects go on, that those items or materials will begin to go down. When do you said it, but when do we see that being when do we see those items being gone outside?
It's generally during your summer break.
Okay.
Majority of the work will be completed. We'll probably be on a whole basis of the project, probably about a 75 to 80% completion phase at the end of August.
Thank you for understanding my question as I stumbled on my own words. Thank you.
Teresa, anything?
No. Thank you for being here.
Ron or Matt?
No, thank you.
Just a quick request, if I may, for the next time the Schneider team's going to present, and thank you for for the work you're doing on behalf of our district and our kids. When we originally entered into our agreement, I think there were two primary objectives we were trying to achieve. One was to have a comprehensive way to pick up a large chunk of deferred maintenance that we deferred for far too long. And the other one was a net savings over time. Would it be possible for us to have a graph? You had a pretty good chart about a year ago when we embarked on this project that said, here's the juncture where you start saving money, and here's when you'll realize it, and if you don't, we'll write you checks to cover the difference up to a certain point. Would it be possible to get some kind of a simple graph that showed time and money to see where those curves cross for our next session?
Yes, the answer is yes, we can provide that.
And,
Okay, and Dr. Summers, roughly when is our next scheduled session with the Schneider team?
We had yet to identify one, so what do you, yeah, well, it could either be June or it could be August in terms of summer. So probably August would be my sense at this point.
Good. We'll look forward to seeing those results. Thank you all for what you're doing.
agreed. Let me build on what Ron just said. Is that sounds like the type of graph that would be updated over time as well. So it might be good just to have it on our community website here too.
Good call.
You're already realizing energy savings already
Right.
with the implementation of the plug scope of work. So
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Summers, at our
Yes.
next update, would
Yes.
it might be a good idea to share out the progress on our vestibules on it looks grand, it's done, yay us.
Sure. They are. There's some fine tuning that's happening. They're functional. They're just not as aesthetically attractive as what we are looking at doing. So I think that would be the extent of the update. They're already functioning. They're already in. So I don't know if that has been specifically shared. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that it's been specifically shared. Like I can remember when I walked into Lewis Palmer Elementary, there was still some things that need to be worked on.
Yes, sure. We
For
are happy to include that in that scope as well.
Thanks.
Good. Let's move on to our
Thank you,
next
gentlemen.
work session item D4, financial planning and 2022-2023 budget development timeline. You have all of 10 minutes.
I don't think I'll need all 10 minutes.
Awesome.
Thank you, though. Good morning. So based on some feedback from the board and from Dr. Summers, I went ahead and revised the schedule that was presented at the last board meeting. So for the April board meeting, I will be presenting a preliminary budget in summary. It won't have the details included, but just to give the board a sense of what things are looking like for the 22-23 school year budget. I'll ask for some input on the enrollment projections and the revenue forecast at that time. That leaves us open in the May 3rd work session to take a deeper dive into potential options for the board to collaborate with the district on as far as possible mill levy things to consider in the November election. So we are already at work trying to put together additional information to help those conversations take place. So we are getting input from outside sources to help us understand what options might be available, and that will then lead to the conversations for the board to evaluate at the May 3rd work session. Some of the considerations are listed here on the timeline. And then at the May 16th board meeting, I plan to present the proposed budget at that time, followed by the June 7th work session, we'll go ahead and provide an update on the 2021 audit findings. And then finally, on June 20th, we should be prepared to present the adopted budget for approval. Are there any questions on any of that?
Can I add one additional aspect to the upcoming May work session? At that session, we also will have detailed results and analysis from the community survey that is currently in place. So our thought with your support would be to share those results, share that analysis so that you at least have that understanding. What I think Kitty will be able to do in her presentation is create and we're calling it a deeper dive, but it'll be that summary of that bigger picture with more of the longer range implications, because I think we're both looking at this in terms of what a potential ask might be, as well as how does that situate within all of the different pieces and parts that we're looking at, both in regards to this upcoming year's budget, as well as really more of those bigger pictures. So those are some of the items under that optimizing revenue and thinking about that mill levy, really more in terms of total mills over time and accounting for all of those different variables. So I just wanted to make mention of that, realizing that that will be a lot of information to process. So we'll do our best to keep that focused and allow you all to dig deep with us.
So just to reinforce what I just heard, I hope, the third bullet point under long-term mill levy projections, where it's trending, we're talking about historical trends, but you're also looking out into the future. So
Very much so.
when bonds are paid off, there's adjustments, et cetera, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. Any questions from board members?
Not right now.
Ron or Matt?
No.
No, thank you.
All right. Kitty, thank you very much. That was less than 10 minutes.
Gain some time.
All right, D5, legislative update. Dr. Summers and Tiffany Upchurch will give us a 5-minute update here on current progress.
Ms. Upchurch, would you like me to go, or?
Why don't you start with the long bill?
Okay. Just as this document is referenced, couple of notes. What we were aiming to accomplish in the development of this, thank you, Tiffany, for your indulgence of my way of thinking, is essentially we put some of the higher profile bills for your awareness. Underneath that, trying to bullet out just kind of the very high level description of what's happening within that particular bill and where it's at. So currently, for example, the long bill, well, that was just introduced last week, so it's under consideration. And then you'll also see a third bullet, or the last bullet under each of those bills, with just a quick line, and that's really where I want to spend some time, is just the projected impact to the district, because it's really easy to get pretty lost in the weeds of what are all the different conversations that are happening at the state level and pros and cons and so forth. So how can we walk away with a better understanding of here's how it affects us? So with long bill, and maybe I'll take the first couple here, Tiffany, and then we can tennis ball it or volleyball it back and forth here. So the current projection has been modified by the long bill that was introduced to buy down the budget stabilization factor by 182 million, which would represent the buy down over at least the next 2 years. The interesting note there is that that represents about a 70 million difference from what was originally projected to the total of 250 million year over year. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about the impact of inflation and other dynamics that I think my way of describing it is the state is just nervous about too big of a buy down. There's also an accounting of $80 million in funding, additional funding for special education student needs. All that said, the projected impact right now, as of today, has our PPOR projection, which I do think is a pretty legitimate projection, one that we can work with as we're drafting budget, et cetera, to just over 9,000 per student, which represents approximately 500 more per student year over year. Anything else?
Yeah, I will jump in and say that when we're looking at these projections, this is statewide per pupil funding. This is every student in Colorado would receive that base fund of $9,043.39. Wait, go ahead. I know you're.
I don't think it is a base funded. I think that's actually our unique district.
That is
amount.
ours. Okay.
Yes.
But what
And I'm looking to Kitty on that because that comes straight from CDE. So I want to say that that has been a run that the state has calculated that is not base funding.
Right. So I didn't word it correctly. What I was trying to say is, as they're buying down the PP or the budget stabilization factor, every school district, not the same amount as what each school district is getting, but every school district in Colorado is affected by the buy down.
Sure.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Sure. Yeah, I want to be clear. That $9,000 amount
Is
is
ours.
a District 38 projection,
Right.
not a base funding across the state. Okay.
My apologies.
That's okay. That's
come across
just
that
so that we're on the same page. Thanks for,
Quick question.
yes.
So I may have missed it in the audio, so my apologies. $500 a student times about 6,500 students means what to our annual revenues?
I think we're looking at around 3 million.
Okay. So it represents a $50 million budget, a little over 5%.
I'm trusting your math there, Mr. Schwartz. Yeah, we're coming. I think the projection is around.
Dr. Summers.
I'm sorry.
I said, don't trust my math.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can do the first part of that calculation at 3 million. The second part.
2.5% would be 5%. So, or 2.5 million would be 5%. So we're a little over that.
Sure.
Great.
That makes sense to me. Okay, I'm going to keep going fast. This one is an example of a very meaty and weedy bill, which I will not pretend to be an expert on. I can only tell you that it is causing a lot of heartburn across multiple districts, but this will pass. I will tell you right now, as much as it's under consideration, there's multiple amendments that are occurring under Department of Early Childhood, which essentially creates an independent department, meaning this department will now take the place of CDE operating early childhood programming, and essentially this is representative of the governor's desire to have a fully funded universal preschool program statewide. So the projected impact to us, which we're still learning as we go, my understanding of next year is there won't be a lot of change in the initial rollout, but we are going to have to make sure that we are operating under these new rules, that we are essentially a local coordinating organization, and that there could be some funding dynamics that we just have to be attuned to. I, again, will not pretend to be an expert on what those are right now. And as I pause there for a minute, Amber, is there anything that you would add to that you think we're hearing that we need to be prepared for?
One thing I'll add, what we are hearing, and again, it's, as Dr. Summers mentioned, it's weedy and messy, and we're staying abreast of the changes as they occur. We are anticipating that a local entity, yet to be determined, would be the recipient of our CPP, or Colorado Preschool Funding, in the future, and that funding would be dispersed to all preschool programs, to include in-home daycare preschool programs in the future. So that's kind of a significant change that we're anticipating.
And it's being debated as they're debating the long bill, and that's the budget bill. That all has to be summed up and put into a nice, neat package by May 6th, I think is the deadline. And hopefully they'll have that information before then, because that's comes upon end of session. But it's being debated as they're also debating the budget.
Ms. Upchurch, would you like to take the next 2 or 3
Sure.
or however many?
The para-employment after teacher retirement, that one has passed. It is now become law. And what that does is, under current law, public employees, the Retirement Association, which is what para is, limits the number of days that a retired teacher can work as a substitute teacher. So the bill temporarily waives the limits for qualified service and teachers in any district or charter school, and basically the bottom line is that they can now, we have a substitute teacher shortage. So this is designed to help with the shortage of substitutes. It does not dig into a educator's para benefits, whereas under law before, if you work after you're retired, that can dig into your para.
Actually, one quick clarification on that point. My understanding of this, and I don't think we're in a position as of yet, but for example, if we were having a really hard time filling a position like, let's just say a math teacher, or it could be some type of career and technical education teacher, if we have a retiree who can qualify as a sub, we could actually hire them as a long-term sub. That is not to say that they would be in a position that could be, I think it could be extended for as long as a year. It would be essentially a year over year type of a position. But it's not, they would be under the heading of a substitute teacher, but in a position that could fill a hard to fill position for us. That is my understanding of how that can be applied.
And the effective date?
For next school year. So any hires that we make beginning or as effective of the August 22 through May of 23 school year.
So they would be considered long-term substitute.
Correct.
Basically. The next one, to go through them real quick, removing barriers to educator preparation. Part of the problem, part of what we're seeing with recruiting educators today is every 7 years, teachers have to recertify. And as they're going through and getting their teaching certification, they have to pay to take their tests to become certified as an educator. So basically what this does is it's a stipend of $11,000, and eligible student is placed as a student educator in a 32-week residency, and they can receive a stipend of $22,000 while they're working through that.
And I probably should adjust that projected impact to, it ultimately is designed, if approved, it would ideally attract more folks to enter into the teaching field and compensate student teachers who are right now not compensated. We're not able to do that as a district. Specific college programs also have difficulty doing this. My understanding is that this would be a state fund that would be created that would help reimburse or essentially support student teachers as they're working through their student teacher requirements. So the projected impact would be ideally it rewards and incentivizes student teachers, and in the event that we have those in place for next year, it can only help them maintain their interest in education and their support for their effort through those credentials through that process.
I'll take the next one, and then Dr. Summers, you take the last two.
Oh, great.
1131, this has been talked about a lot because there's a lot of ins and outs and unintended consequences potentially. I don't think it's going to really impact us in D38, but it reduces the justice involvement for young children. It's still under consideration. Basically, right now, if there's a situation in a school, a student, say it's 2 students, we can't necessarily suspend a student because it's still in the juvenile courts, and so the juvenile courts are responsible for that, and so there's an age on it, and so they're looking at changing it, the age limits on it, except and what we worked on in CASB is to make it so that in the case of a serious offense, the juvenile court's jurisdiction extends to juveniles who are 10, 11, and 12 years of age. So easy ones to call out is homicide or assault. But this also changes the age of 10, 11, and 12 up to 13 years old, where it would be handled more in the school more than it would the juvenile system.
Okay, we're doing a great job, Ms. Upchurch. All right, 22-1260 is an example of a bill that is getting a lot of attention right now, and I can tell you at least officially from the case position as well as our local Pikes Peak Alliance, we have taken a position of oppose. Ms. Upchurch, I'm not sure if CASB has taken an official position on this bill or not.
I can't remember. You tell.
Okay, so as you're researching that, the essence of this bill is to allow a healthcare professional, or essentially a doctor, to direct the school to say, this is what the student is going to need, and this is the service that should be allowed to occur within a school setting. So it allows students to receive those medically necessary services within a school setting. So the reason for our opposition to this is summarized below. Essentially, what we are asserting is that this overrides a process that is already put into place that supports students through their IEP or their 504. What we believe happens is it creates a conflict in terms of what can actually happen within the school day. Obviously, we would not argue about the student receiving services at all. It would just be, does it need to happen within the school day and at what times? So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this bill. I just can tell you it's an example of one that's getting a lot of debate. And then the last one, and Ms. Upchurch, I don't know if you have that information or not on 1260, but 1294.
Taken a position yet.
Okay, so just monitoring from a CASB angle. 1294, long story short, it is really about allowing charter schools to pursue the oversight for or the provision of special education services independent of their local chartering authority. Without going into a ton of detail on this, I'm not sure exactly how this will impact us yet, because I do not know Monument Academy's thoughts about whether or not they would choose to pursue this or not. My current assumption would be that this is not broken for us, because Monument Academy does serve quite a few students with special needs, and we have a pretty good relationship in how we're coordinating and making that happen. So it will depend, this one, on whether or not it will be an adjustment that Monument Academy wishes to pursue. Something I did not put in that projected impact is that it's possible that we would have to revisit and revise our contract if that's the case, because those provision for administrative services around special education are part of what's already in our contract. So more to come on that, depending on what may happen based on Monument Academy's wishes, but it gives them the right to be able to do so.
And CASB has not taken an official position on this yet. I think we'll be discussing this one on Friday. I do anticipate this one will pass.
Yes, it just passed through the House, so now it's in
onto
front of the Senate.
And it has bipartisan support.
And that is our legislative update for the April 5th work session.
Any questions or comments from board members? All right, next section is D6, board member reflections. Tiffany, can we start with you and go to Teresa, Ron, and then Matt?
I don't really have any reflections other than to say thank you for the collaboration. And I had a question that came to mind as we were having our presentations today. And maybe this is, I don't want to open a can of worms, but when we're having our work sessions, as we're seeing presentations, do we have an opportunity for staff, say Amber or Mark has a question or Kitty has a question, for our staff to be able to chime in with a question? I mean, I know it's a board work session, but it's also staff can ask as well, right?
Anybody at the table?
I don't have any objection to that.
Okay. You guys are always quiet when we see that, when there's presentations, and I thought, I wonder if anybody else has questions other than us board members.
I might add something, and I don't want to speak for anybody here, so please, anyone can chime in. We tend to, as a team, make it a habit to review all of our presentations collaboratively in advance. So oftentimes our questions are surfaced during that particular preview, but it's not to say that we wouldn't have others that come up. So I think if what you're encouraging is more of a continuous spirit of collaboration, Tiffany, yeah, absolutely. We appreciate that.
And I would just echo that that's the reason we have this new configuration, is so that there's more interaction. So that's part of the design of why we sit the way we're sitting now.
We appreciate that.
I don't have a comment other than to say there is another Engage and Elevate session between now and April 18th.
That's correct. April 12th.
12th, I'm looking at Palmer Ridge High School at 6 p.m. in case anybody at large is listening.
With an optional school tour and Palmer Ridge showcase / putting them on display from 5 to 6 ahead of that session. So we wanted to call that out as well.
And that's during the DAC meeting. It's tied into the DAC meeting, so it's also an opportunity if somebody wants to come and engage and elevate and see how a DAC meeting is run.
Yep. We're looking forward to it.
Ron?
Thank you. Just very briefly, I was remiss in not making a comment on item C1, our superintendent's evaluation. So I just wanted to say that I'm elated that we have a quality individual who behaves like the Energizer Bunny, never tires, and keeps our students safe, warm, and well educated, and continues to raise the bar. Keep doing what you're doing. It's working really well. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
He did 2 laps while you were talking.
We are counting his steps.
Thanks, Ron. You also just gave Mark permission to put my face on an Energizer Bunny, so I'm sure there's going to be some sort of fun
That will
with that.
All right. Thanks, Ron. Matt?
Mr. Taylor, I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, board members. I appreciate all the effort today. There is one thing that's in the executive file attachments there. It's end of year. And please, if you haven't already, contact Vicki and make arrangements. It's the week of May 2nd through the 6th. It's Teacher Appreciation Week. It's similar to what we did last year. So I just wanted to encourage board members to look at that and to communicate with Vicki so we can have as much attendance as possible. And with that, I think,
Can I add one more thing to that, Mr. Taylor? You set it up perfectly. So there is the potential of a time conflict on the 3rd. I'm not sure what school we're going to be at, but we would expect to serve breakfast from about 7:45, I believe, to roughly 8:30. And if our work session is still set to start at 8, that makes it hard for us to complete our service. Would there be anything wrong? I'm, I guess, looking for a consensus from the board here on moving the start time back to 9 o'clock on the 3rd, or any other preference that you all may have.
and speaking to myself in the mirror, let's limit that work session to just the budgeting aspect so that we have.
And the survey, if we could do both.
Well, it sounded like that.
Yeah, the two
included.
kind of work hand in hand. So, yep, we would be happy to accommodate that. So,
Thumbs up for me.
thumbs up, Ms. Phillips, thumbs up.
And that's at Lewis Palmer Elementary School.
Thank you for checking that. So we would hustle over from LPE back over here at 9 o'clock, and we'll be very focused and.
Yeah, cool question here. Are we talking about May 3rd?
Yes, Mr. Klassen.
All right, I'm sorry, there wasn't a Google invite on May 3rd that was sent out, at least not to my account. And unfortunately, I would be unable to attend that meeting. I have something that starts at 9 a.m. So with that being said, Mr. Taylor, you're more than welcome to move it to whatever time you'd like. But unfortunately, I'm already booked for a legal professional commitment at that time.
Okay, we'll revert back to everyone. Anything else, Dr.
That was the one thing. Thank you for indulging that.
Then let's adjourn till April 18th at 6 p.m.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that, Casey.